My name is Ajay Sood. I run a platform called Traveler, and today I want to talk about one of the most powerful tools in a travel photographer's kit, the wide angle lens. Specifically, how to use it for landscape and architecture. Not just what it does, but why it does it, and how to make it work for you. Let's begin. Before we get into the wide angle lens itself, there are three short concepts I want you to understand first. These are the foundations. Without that, everything else won't fully make sense. But before the foundations, let me name five mistakes I see photographers make with wide angle lens repeatedly. 1. Standing too far away. 2. Tilting the camera carelessly. 3. Letting messy edges into the frame. 4. No foreground anchor. And 5. Using wide angle when a telephoto would actually be better. By the end of today, you will understand exactly why each of these happens and how to fix every one of them. Here is the most fundamental question in photography. Why does a vast landscape feel magnificent in person and look flat in a photograph? Humans have two eyes. Two eyes give us retinal disparity. Each eye sees from a slightly different angle. Your brain fuses those two images into one image with depth. That is stereopsis, the third dimension. A camera has one eye, no stereopsis, no depth. Everything we do in landscape and architecture photography, every compositional decision is an attempt to create the illusion of the third dimension on a flat sensor. Keep that in mind. It is the thread that runs through everything today. What makes a lens a wide angle? It comes down to focal length. A 43 to 50 lens on full frame is often considered close to a natural perspective or how human eye sees. That is why a 43 to 50 lens is called a normal lens. On a full frame camera, lens below about 35 is commonly considered wide angle. Around 24 and below feels distinctly wide. 20 17 11 and with that shorter focal length comes a wider angle of view. A normal lens sees roughly 46 degrees. A 24 lens on a full frame gives roughly an 84-degree diagonal field of view. That is nearly double the field of view. But here is the single most common misunderstanding about wide angle lenses. It is not the lens that changes perspective. It is your distance from the subject that changes perspective. Perspective changes when you move. Framing changes when you change the lens. Keep those two separate. It'll save you a great deal of confusion. The third concept is hyperfocal distance. The closest distance at which a lens can be focused while keeping objects at infinity acceptably sharp. In simpler terms, it is the magic focusing distance that gives you maximum depth of field from foreground to horizon. Wide angle lenses have a shorter hyperfocal distance than other lenses, and it becomes even shorter when you narrow the aperture. This is enormously useful for landscape photography, and we will see exactly why in a few moments. For now, go to the App Store or Play Store and download a hyperfocal distance calculator. It is free. It will do the math for you. Quick example. At 17 and f11, the hyperfocal distance drops to around 1 meter. Focus at 1 meter from your camera and roughly from around half a meter to infinity is sharp. That is the gift of the wide angle for landscape. Now that we have foundations, let us look at the four key characteristics of a wide angle lens. These are the four things that define how that lens behaves. And understanding them is what separates photographers who use it well from those who struggle with it. Characteristic number one, a wider angle of view than normal and telephoto lenses. We have covered the theory, let's see it in practice. This is India Gate in New Delhi, shot at 25 mm. Notice how much of the scene we capture. The fountain, the lawns, the surrounding trees, the gate itself placed naturally in the frame. The image has context. We understand where we are. Wider view is the only characteristic visibly at work here. And even at 25 mm, it is doing real work. But watch what happens when we go wider. Same location, same monument, 17 mm. Feel the difference immediately. That curved red sandstone pathway now sweeps dramatically into the foreground. It is large, close, leading your eye towards the gate. The sky claims more of the frame. The world feels bigger. That contrast, near large, far small, is the beginning of depth. Not just more coverage, more drama. Characteristic number two, distortion along the edges and sides. This is where wide angle lenses get a bad reputation, often deservedly. But before we look at examples, let me show you something from an entirely different field that will make this concept instantly clear. This is Mercator projection, the world map most of us grew up with. Look at Greenland in the north. It appears almost as large as Africa. Why? Because Mercator projection works like a wide angle lens. Greenland, which is 14 times smaller than Africa, looks almost as big. That is the warning for photographers. Objects near the edges of a wide angle frame can appear far larger than reality. Here is a vivid photographic example. Cafe Tomaselli in Salzburg, Austria, shot at 17 mm. Look at the green and white striped umbrellas. The ones in the center of the frame look completely normal, round, symmetrical. Now look at the umbrellas at the far left and far right edges. They are visibly stretched and pulled outwards. Same umbrellas, same lens, same moment. Position in the frame changes everything. The practical rule, the center of the frame is the zone of honesty. The edges are the zone of exaggeration. Place your critical subjects accordingly. And here, at 11 mm, we enter extreme wide angle territory. This is Catholicon, the main dome of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Shot looking straight up. Without an 11 mm lens, you get a fragment. With the 11 mm, you get the full statement of the space. Distortion is clearly present. The arches bow, the stone walls curve at the edges, but shooting upward into a sacred dome, that curvature amplifies the spiritual geometry. It feels like the space is enveloping you. 11 mm is an extreme tool, and here it is being used with intent. Characteristic number 3, lesser hyperfocal distance and greater depth of field. We talked about this in the foundations. Now let's see what it actually means when you press the trigger. 3 things follow from a shorter hyperfocal distance. 1, you can focus much closer to the camera and still have the background sharp. 2, you get a larger depth of field. More of the scene is in focus, top to bottom. 3, that depth of field can extend all the way to infinity. For landscape photographers, this is a gift. A sharp foreground and a sharp horizon in the same frame without compromise. 17 mm, Somoriri, a high altitude lake in Ladakh. Look at the foreground. Ice needles, sharp, crystalline, intricate, almost close enough to touch. Now look at the background. The turquoise lake, the bare golden sand dunes beyond, the snow capped peak, the dramatic cloud filled blue sky, all of it sharp in one frame. This is the third characteristic at its most powerful, which is hyperfocal distance. The ice is right at the camera, the mountains are kilometers away, both are in focus, and the size contrast, ice enormous, mountains tiny, is telling your brain there is depth here. The image would simply not exist without a wide angle lens. Characteristic number 4, pronounced foreground, diminutive background. Elements close to the camera appear large, dominant, powerful. Elements far from the camera appear small, diminished, distant. And that contrast between the large foreground and a small background is one of the most effective ways to create the illusion of depth on a flat sensor. But if you stand far, you get a small subject, an empty foreground, and a weak image. Remember mistake number 1? Get physically closer and the foreground becomes your most powerful compositional force. Move closer or do not bother with a wide angle. 27 mm, Kanyakumari, the southern tip of India. In the foreground, blue fishing boats, large and close, filling the bottom of the frame. They are dominant. In the background, the Vivekananda Rock Memorial and Tiruvalluvar statue. Significant structures, but in this frame, they look small and distant. Close is equal to large is equal to important. Far is equal to small is equal to context. And that rearrangement creates energy in the frame. Your eye enters at the boats and travel out to sea. That journey is depth. 24 mm, Rosh Hanikra, the grottos on Israel-Lebanon border. In the immediate foreground, the modern circular viewing balcony with 2 visitors looking out over the Mediterranean. The balcony's curved steel structure is large, close, immediate. Below and beyond, the coastal cliff road winds south. The grottos are cut into the rock face. The sea stretches to the horizon. All of it small. All of it distant. That contrast, the balcony large, the coast small, is classic 4th wide angle behavior. Near objects gain power, far objects lose scale, and together they create depth. Let's bring these 4 together. 1. Wider angle of view than normal and telephoto. 2. Distortion along the edges and sides. 3. Lesser hyperfocal distance, more depth of field. 4. Pronounced foreground, diminutive background. These 4 characteristics work together. Understanding how they interact is what gives you control over the lens, rather than the lens controlling you. From this point onward, watch the dot grid in the corner of each image slide. It shows you which of these 4 characteristics is actively at work in that particular photograph. Sometimes one trait dominates, sometimes several work in concert. This turns every photograph into a case study. Now, landscapes. When we stand before a great landscape, what moves us? Usually 3 things: scale, depth, and the feeling of presence, of actually being there. A successful landscape photograph tries to preserve all 3, and wide angle lenses are often the ideal tool for that challenge. Let's look at how they actually perform. 24 mm, Hundar, Nubra Valley, one of the highest cold deserts in the world. Sand dunes at altitude. That contrast alone is extraordinary. sand and snow-capped peaks in the same frame. The dune in the foreground has ripple textures that are sharp and tactile. That's fourth characteristic of wide-angle lens. Dominant close objects and diminutive far objects. The scrub vegetation, the green tree strip in the midground, and then the enormous Karakoram mountains behind. And those are characteristic 1 and 3 in play, wider view and depth due to hyperfocal distance. Without width, the uniqueness of this place is impossible to communicate. The wide angle earns its place here. 27 mm, Kanyakumari again, but now at Blue R. A completely different mood. The foreground is now dark volcanic rocks with waves blurred to a silver white mist. In the middle distance, the Vivekananda Rock Memorial now lit in warm golden light against the purple orange blue twilight sky. The rocks are vast and near. The memorial is distant and small. C3 holds both in focus. C3 characteristic 3. But there is something else here, light and mood. The wide angle is not just capturing the geography, it is capturing the atmosphere of this place at this hour. That is what great wide angle landscape photography does at its best. A leading line is any element in the frame, a road, a river, a staircase, a shoreline that draws the viewer's eye from the foreground into the distance. The wide angle lens amplifies the power of leading lines because it exaggerates the foreground. The start of the line is closer, larger. The end disappears into a more distant background. The journey from start to end is longer. The sense of depth is greater. 24 mm. The Baha'i Gardens on Mount Carmel, Haifa, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Shot from the top of the hill, looking straight down the central axis of the terraced gardens towards the city and the Mediterranean beyond. The entire garden geometry converges towards a single vanishing point on the coastline. The foreground of the garden is large and close. The port of Haifa and the sea are small and distant. The fourth characteristic creates the scale. The third characteristic keeps everything in focus. And the formal symmetry of the garden creates the most powerful possible leading line. One that the architect designed and the wide angle is now amplifying. This is depth by design, captured by the right lens. 24 mm, the sacred tank at the Bhoganandishwara temple complex in Bengaluru. The wide angle captures the full enclosure of the tank. The converging horizontal step lines run from the foreground corner towards the far gateway. Your eyes follow the steps inward across the water towards the colonnades and sky beyond. It does not have to be a road or a river. Any repeating element that recedes can become a leading line. 17 mm, looking straight down a historic stone spiral staircase. All four characteristics and the exaggerated leading lines are active here, and it is worth naming each one. Characteristic 1, wider view. The 17 mm captures the full spiral from this position. A longer lens would have only seen a portion of it. Distortion. The curve of the spiral is amplified. The distortion makes the spiral look tighter, more dramatic. Third characteristic, depth of field. The near railing is sharp. The stone floor far below is sharp. Everything in between is sharp. Fourth characteristic, foreground. The near edge is enormous. The floor far below is tiny. That size difference is your brain reading vertical depth. When all four characteristics work in concert, the image does something no other lens can do. TSC 17 mm, a large industrial hall repurposed as a conference and exhibition space in Ostrava, Czech Republic. The right wall is floor-to-ceiling Andy Warhol prints, Marilyns, flowers, bright pop art color. The left wall is glass looking out onto an industrial complex beyond. Delegates are seated at long conference tables. The red annotation lines show three converging perspective lines running the length of the hall. Towards the far end, the floor line, the ceiling line, and the line of the conference tables. The hall is perhaps 50 meters long. At 17 mm, shot from the near end, the entire length of the space is captured in one frame, giving a clear idea of depth. Now, architecture. The goal in architectural photography is different from landscape. Sometimes we want to capture the entire facade if shooting exterior. We want to convey the depth and volume of the space, and we want to minimize distortion or at least control it deliberately. And the wide angle mostly helps. I say mostly because there is a challenge specific to architecture, the focal plane challenge. When you photograph a building or a large interior, the subject is not at single distance. The near wall is close, the far wall is distant, the floor is one distance, the ceiling is another. Getting everything sharp, near and far, is the core challenge of architectural photography. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. 11 mm, the GOOM departmental store on Red Square in Moscow. Shot at blue hour, the entire facade lit in warm golden light. GOOM is 242 meters wide. I was standing approximately 60 meters from the building. Think about that. At 11 mm, the full width of the building fits in one frame. Without an 11 mm lens, you get a piece of this building. With it, you get the full statement. Let me show you the geometry of that challenge. The GOOM building, 242 meters wide, standing at its center, 121 meters from each end. The nearest part of the building directly in front of me, 60 meters. The far end of the building, the diagonal distance, 135 meters. So the nearest point is 60 meters, the farthest corner is 135 meters. That is a ratio of more than 2 to 1 in subject distance within a single frame. The wide angle's shorter hyperfocal distance gives us the best possible chance of holding all of it in acceptable focus. Instead of fighting the distortion and the focal plane challenge, what if we use them to our advantage? 26 mm. Looking north from the top of the rock across the Manhattan skyline. The city stretches all the way to the horizon. You can see Fifth Avenue as a glowing corridor running north into the distance. The full Midtown and Upper Manhattan grid. The characteristic 1, the wide angle, captures the full sweep of the skyline in one frame. And the characteristic 4, which is large things which are closer and smaller things as they are going farther away. The foreground buildings are larger and more dominant, and this gives us the sense of depth. The entire city is the subject, and the wide angle is the only tool that can hold it. 17 mm, the oculus. Santiago Calatrava's extraordinary transportation hub at the World Trade Center, New York City. We are standing at one end of the main hall, looking along its length. The white ribbed vaults soar overhead and converge at the far end. Without a wide angle, you get ribs. With 17 mm, you get the full statement of the space, its height, its symmetry, its awe-inspiring size. Architecture designed for wonder, a lens that can match it. 17 mm, Rani Ki Vav, the Queen's Stepwell in Patan, Gujarat, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Every surface is sculptural. Columns, friezes, niches, thousands of figures. The challenge? Capture the full depth of this shaft. Near columns, middle galleries, far sanctuary niche. All at different distances. All needing to be legible. At 17 mm, the characteristic 1 gives us the full width. Characteristic 2 gives us the perspective that exaggerates the recession of columns beautifully. The distortion here is architectural drama, not error. And the third characteristic, which is the hyperfocal distance, holds near carving and distant niche both in focus. This is a space that demands the wide angle. No other lens tells this story. Before we conclude, a word of caution. Wide angle lenses are unforgiving if not used well. They show everything, every element in the frame, every distortion, every mistake. So, before pressing the trigger, make sure you police the edges. Check for intrusive poles, trash bins, and even bright distractions that pull your eye away from the subject. Now, let's see what happens when the wide angle works against you, and then, crucially, how to fix it. TSC 17 the atrium of the ITC Grand Maratha Hotel in Mumbai, one of the finest hotel interiors in India. A neoclassical atrium, multi-story colonnaded galleries, a central rotunda, mosaic floor, and yet this photograph is uncomfortable because the camera has been tilted steeply downwards and to the right. The canopy arch intrudes awkwardly. The vertical lines lean and distort. The perspective is so warped that the beautiful interior becomes confusing. The wide angle did not cause this problem. The camera angle caused this problem. And that brings us to the single most important rule in architectural wide angle photography. The rule is simple. Keep your camera parallel to the ground. The green tick camera is held level. The sensor plane is perfectly parallel to the ground. The three red cross cameras are tilted, one angled upwards, one tilted left, and one tilted downwards. Any tilt, up, down, left, or right, will introduce converging verticals and distortion that fights against the image. It is not the lens's fault, it is the angle of the camera. And here, the same atrium, the same TSC 17 lens, but now with the camera held level. I have used the shift function of the lens though. The difference is immediate. The vertical lines of the galleries are straight. The perspective converges naturally towards the far arch as the eye would expect. The rotunda sits centrally. The floor mosaic reads clearly. Same lens, same space, same focal length, completely different result. The rule before you press the trigger on an interior or a building, level your camera. Use your camera's built-in level. Discipline here costs nothing and it transforms the image. Before the bottom line, a quick quiz. The next slide shows a photograph. I want you to look at it carefully and tell me, or at least think about, the focal length of the lens. Use everything we have covered. The perspective, the foreground-background relationship, the sense of depth or compression, the depth of field. Have a look. The answer is 70 This is the Himalayas, Mount Everest at the center, shot from an aircraft window. It is a breathtaking subject, and yet, look at what the lens is doing. All the peaks feel stacked close together. The foreground mountains and the background peaks appear almost on the same plane. There is no dramatic foreground element pulling you in. The point of this quiz image is not telephoto bad, wide angle good. No. The point is learn to read focal distance or focal length from an image. And once you can read it, you can choose it intentionally. The right lens for the right situation. That is the entire lesson. The bottom line. Depending on the situation, use the right lens. The wide angle is a magnificent tool for vast landscapes, for grand interiors, for scenes with strong leading lines, for situations where you need depth of field from near to far. But it is not a substitute for seeing. The wide angle will show you everything in the scene. Your job as the photographer is to decide what the scene is actually saying and then choose the lens that says it best. Keep the camera level, find the leading line, place your foreground with intention, and understand which of the four characteristics are working for you and which ones you need to manage. Sometimes that is 17 mm, sometimes it is 70 mm. The lens does not make the decision, you do. Thank you. I am Ajay Sood. This is Traveler. Subscribe to my channel. I would love to continue this conversation. If you have questions, let's discuss. If you have photographs you would like a second opinion on, bring them. You can find me at traveler.in, on Instagram and Pinterest as Traveler, on Twitter as The Traveler, and at traveler@traveler.in. Thank you for your time and attention. Now, let's talk.